y'all, this is Marley K. Hope y'all are well. Got a topic that I want to share with you. Well, it's not really a topic, it's an idea. And I guess it's a topic. But I've been thinking a lot just about how expensive it is to rent and how, a lot of people don't live in situations where they like have family members that they can fall back on because their families don't have houses. Like you have generations of people who live in apartments. I have some friends and relatives who live up north. And so they all live in, they live city life. So they don't have houses. They don't have, relatives that they can go to stay with and pay them rent if times get hard. And then you have a lot of older people who have ample room, but because younger people are so disrespectful today, you can't live with them. And because older people are so set in their ways, it's difficult to live with them. So we have these differences in cultures, and just because of the way that American culture is set up in general, it's very difficult for us to live with each other because we've taken on the Gentiles' independent mindset, so to speak. We're taught to, as soon as you get able to grow up, get out, you got to take care of yourself, get your own place, you fend for yourself, get your own car, fend for yourself, leave. And, a lot of times we have to leave because we don't have resources in our community to take care of us. So we have to leave our communities, which, means that we leave family behind. And as the economy collapses, as the um, order of things globally changes. I have to watch my language, so excuse the pauses. Um, it's time for Black people to be creative about how we live. And y'all know we got churches everywhere. A lot of churches are paid for. A lot of them sit on lands they don't do anything with. They just load it with dead people, have cemeteries, but they don't. They have land where they could grow food, and they have enough land where they could build houses or host tiny homes, different things like that. But they don't do that. And I personally am very disappointed in the amount of property churches have acquired over the last, few decades, and they don't do anything with it. They get the church paid off and then they don't do anything with the land. And so here we are, we're going to have millions of Black people who don't have access to fresh food, and the churches aren't growing gardens. They're not, trying to do anything with livestock. They're not trying to do anything to sustain the people except for through the word. And while the word is good, faith without some work is dead. So if you're not working to sustain your people in the natural, it's going to be difficult to try to get to teach them to have faith spiritually and believe in things that they can't see. And so, even if it's something or a principle as simple as reaping and sowing, and harvesting, sowing and harvesting, we just don't do enough in our communities to use our churches in ways that make them some earthly good. So we'll be better off. And as things change, as things decline, I often wonder, like, what is going to happen to a lot of these churches? Because people are going to stop coming to church. They're not going to be useful. I mean, you go to church now, there's hardly anybody in a lot of these churches, especially where I live. It's like a bunch of churches. And, sometimes I go to church, it may be 30 people at church on a good day. if they're not having anything. And you go to the parking lot is empty. You look at the church lands, it's good land, nothing done to it, and no plans to do anything to it. No thought processes whatsoever. So I was thinking about, what could I do? But I know it's going to be like pulling teeth with our people. And another thing is that a lot of these churches are tied up into these denominations that have basically gone back to Rome. So, I don't even know if a lot of these churches would have, these churches that are in denominations would have the power to do anything with their property, because you could build or you could grow a farm there, put tiny house communities or build senior living facilities or whatever you're going to decide to do. And then you find out that the church has gone back, it's a part of the ecumenical movement, and it's gone back to Rome. The church is in apostasy. So you could they could pull a rug from under you. So I don't know. I know this article that I'm getting ready to share with you is from Shelter Force. And it is about Black congregations developing their church land into housing. And that's something that me and Watchman Nehemiah have talked about a lot in the past. And that's something that he's been really passionate about. I told y'all he's a general contractor. But the issue is that you can't get people to see the vision. It takes money, it takes effort, it takes people to support the vision. And it's very difficult when you are a visionary and you're actually a person who can put some pieces together to make some things happen, and you don't have the support of the people. And what happens is a lot of times people will, like myself, I'm a visionary, but I also know how to do some stuff. And like Watchman Nehemiah, he's a visionary, but he knows how to build a house from the ground up. It's difficult to do all that and run around, try to get money, and run around and try to get people to support the vision and buy into it and be interested in it, especially if it's for our people. So the first thing that you have to do is build something, one, at our price point. When I say our, I'm talking about our people, Black people. Two, you have to get them to buy into the vision and see the benefit of it. And because we have such an American way of thinking, like we don't think like our ancestors or in indigenous ways, where you will have a family, the patriarch of the family will buy enough land for all of his children to have some land. And back in the old days, people would build their houses right underneath their parents. Like my great granddaddy, he had, I don't know how many acres of land. He had a lot of land. He had a big farm on a lot of it. But he had a daughter that lived on one side of him. He had a daughter that lived on the other side of him. He had a house that was across the street, that belonged to another one of his children. Then he had another daughter that lived not that far away on another piece of land. And so people either didn't live that far away, but a lot of his children lived on land that he purchased. Well, and they lived out in a rural community, so everybody had wells. They did have city water, but at one point, and electricity. At one point, they didn't have that. They just lived like they did back in the old days. But as they got money to build better houses, they modernized them, but they kept the land. Well, when those people, that generation had children, their children didn't want to live on the land, and their children didn't want to live the way of the elderly people in our family. So they went out and lived in subdivisions amongst strangers and took on mortgages. And So, a lot of times people lose the land because they don't keep the land. They don't want to pay for something that they're not using because we don't understand the value of land. And then all of a sudden you see, um, you know, land is gone. We don't have anything. So now we're saddled with debt. We don't have no land. We don't have anything. But churches have plenty of land. Black churches have land everywhere. The issue is, who does the land belong to? If it's a denominational entity, is it a freestanding entity, or is it a part of the denomination in a region, and that property belongs to the region? So those are some things that you could start thinking about. I know a lot of us, if you're awakened, you've come out of churches, but the time is coming where we're going to have to think about transitioning to use that property for something as a safe haven for our people, because our people are living in properties where they're probably not going to be able to afford their mortgages once this inflation hits, when this dollar collapses and everything goes up. Utilities are going to go up. If you have an adjustable loan on anything, adjustable interest rate, the interest rate is going to go up astronomically, so people will lose stuff. People are not going to be able to rent because the rent is going to be so expensive. And what are we going to do? Are people going to be living in tents? Are people going to be living in their cars? Our people don't even go camping, so we can't even say, well, we're going to stay on the campgrounds or the campsite. We don't go to campsites, one, because we don't feel safe around the pilgrims, but two, we just don't even know anything about it. So, a lot of our people are just going to be desperate. And it's not like you can go back to grandma and them house, because y'all let grandma and them house go. You can't go to your daddy's house or your mama's house because mama moved out of her house and sold it and downsized because she didn't have anybody help her keep it up. So she lives in an apartment or a condo. Um, so we have all these issues that we have to think about. And I'm talking about these things because, one, we don't know how long we're going to be here. We don't know how the exodus is going to happen, and we don't know when the exodus is going to happen, or we're going to be, going through whatever until we are rescued by the Messiah or some ships or something. But until then, we got to worry. And we also have to plan. So I want to share this story with you. I'm sorry to be rambling, but I want to share this story with you because it's an idea that, like, me and Watchman Nehemiah have tossed about. And, we've never been able to really get anything off the ground because part of the problem is you can't get Black people to see into the future. You can't get them to understand that whatever you have, wherever you are, you don't really own it. And churches are set up in a way where they can get property and not have to pay all the taxes that we have to pay, because they're a religious organization. They're grandfathered with a nonprofit status. So there are just some benefits to working with the church to develop housing on the land, or to just have conversations with pastors if they have lands, to maybe invest in things like camping materials so that people can come and have a place, a refuge, because that's what those places should be during times of sorrows. And that's what we're going to be experiencing, a lot of us, or a lot of our people who didn't prepare. So I want to plant that seed, but let me read this story. Some of it anyway. I'm not going to read all of it because I've rambled on so long. But it says many Black churches in the U.S. are moving into developing housing on their own property. Here's some of what's involved in taking that step. So this article was written January 17th, 2023, and it came from Shelter Force. I've done stuff with community economic development. Unfortunately, not with a lot of Black people, because Black people do not do this type of stuff, not often, and unfortunately not successfully, because we just, I don't know. I can't explain it to you, but I've tried to get us to form these types of vehicles so that we can do this same type of thing. And as a person who knows where money is to make these things happen, provided that you have the right structure, it was always just difficult to get our people to get into this type of thing. So now we're in this desperate situation where like everything is being pulled from under us every single day. You saw that article that I shared with you yesterday about the Jim Crow laws coming back, where lenders don't have to give you a loan and they can openly discriminate. Well, that time is going, that thing is going to evolve into a lot of things. It's going to go into landlords can discriminate against people because you're black. They don't want you to stay in their stuff. So, our people don't own as much property as white people, and other ethnic groups are coming here and buying up stuff in droves. Like the little town that I live in, the Indian people are buying up everything they can. They've purchased all the old little houses, people losing their properties for taxes, and they're snapping up everything. Even old, if it's got a structure on it, they're getting it and they're fixing it up for their people. And a lot of the stuff is in black communities, and the Latino gang is doing the same thing. They just purchased a huge chicken processing plant. Well, it was an old sewing plant. It sat vacant for almost 30 years. They purchased it. They're revitalizing it. They're going to open a chicken processing plant, and they're buying up land and old property in the community. Black people are just watching the community change and not really saying nothing about it. But once the community takes on a different tone, starts looking different, starts sounding different, and those people start pushing them out, then it's going to be a problem, but by then it will be too late. And so that's going to be our challenge. In addition to, people who are renting, and you rent it from people, white people who own a lot of property, when they can openly start discriminating and white people don't have no place to stay, they're going to put black people out and house white people, because that's what white supremacy does. It looks out for itself. It's got to keep its interests intact, and their interest is never us. So what are people going to do? And we don't have any options really. And this is, to me, a viable option for us if our churches would buy into it. So, it could be something that you share with congregations. I was thinking about maybe having a meeting or something, but you can't even get pastors to come if they don't know you, if it ain't affiliated with some church, something. It's just really difficult. And again, I've tried to work with a lot of different churches, a lot of black churches, just can't get people to do nothing. And so I want to plant the seed. Maybe you could talk to somebody in your, community. But even if it's just one church, again, all you need is one. If you can save one person, if you can wake one church, one pastor up and get him to see the vision, that's all that matters. It don't have to be all the black churches in America, because you probably don't want all of them anyway. We got some ignorant people that you probably can't deal with. So let me get into this story. Anyway, as the religious and urban landscape changes in North America, churches have had to adapt and evolve. In many communities, houses of worship find themselves with dwindling congregations, dilapidated church buildings, and underutilized and expansive church property that is difficult and expensive to maintain. At the same time, cities across the country are experiencing a housing crisis with the rising cost of housing and property values. All these factors can affect whether a congregation loses members and whether a church stays open or closes its doors. And a lot of churches have been closing their doors, especially since the pandemic, because people stopped going to church. People lost jobs because they refused to take the BAPS, and then um, when people weren't working, they just didn't pay tithes. So it's really challenging. So it says black churches are responding to these shifts in religiousness, population change, and lack of housing by working to change land use regulations and asking how church property can serve a different function in the community. Black churches in Seattle, Oakland, California, and Washington, D.C., among others, are building coalitions and working with city government and other organizations to create pre development studies, participate in capacity building programs, develop housing on their own properties, and advocate for changes to housing policy and zoning regulations. These efforts and initiatives are intended to soften the impact that gentrification and displacement have on low income neighborhoods and communities of color as the cost of housing increases. And so, this is where I want to focus because, we start talking about black, but then they always drag everybody else into the chest. Babylon just get on my nerves so bad. We just can't have black people just can't be uh have a solution solved all alone. We got to have everybody lumped into it. Somebody always got to be lumped into it. So the article starts out talking about black churches, but then it starts somewhere you got to talk about of color, the communities of color. No, the communities of color are black communities because most of them started out as black communities and then they uh, uh, plop those people into our communities. They send them there. They tell them where to go, or they place them there. When they do these um, refugee resettlements, a lot of times they put those people in our communities. So that's how the black community becomes a community of color. It is orchestrated chaos, so to speak, anywhere but where white people live. Notice they don't never have no refugee resettlement programs where white people live, unless they're actually, you know, the whitest of the white people who can pass like a certain class of European or Canadian. But those people typically don't come here as refugees. They come here as students and tourists and they overstay their visas and they can kind of blend in. But the skin pass is what aids them. Other groups, if you can't pass that skin test, you come into the black neighborhood. And so that's how our communities end up being gentrified over and over again. So it says historically, the Black church has been instrumental in advancing racial equity and community development through social service provision and property development. In the 1960s, Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society legislation and programs aimed to eliminate racial and social and racial injustice. One of the programs of the Great Society, the War on Poverty, worked with faith based organizations, including Black churches, to implement federal policies and address racial and economic unrest at the local level. Black churches offered shelter and community support and other community support. By the 1970s and the 80s, Black churches like New York City's Greater Allen African American Methodist Episcopal Church in Queens and Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem were creating separate community development corporations to provide social services to the neighborhood. I'm not talking about social services. Let me tell you why. Because when you start doing social services, it requires you to get government money, and that ain't what you want. And you don't want to get into that. If you're gonna do charity, the people of the community should believe in the people, be able to see the people, and contribute to the charity. Charity is a community project. It should not be taken on by the government. And I know there'll be people who disagree with me, but if you understand, first of all, if you're Yasharel, you should understand we're supposed to take care of each other. We're supposed to take care of our brothers. If we lived the way that the Most High told us to live and worked the way that the Most High told us to work, we wouldn't be in the situations that we're in now. So we wouldn't need social services because your brother across the street would know you're hungry and they would share a meal with you. They would help you get on your feet. If you needed to grow food, they would help you till up your garden. If you needed refuge, they'd help you, you could come into their house and stay. That's what we are commanded to do. So I don't believe, now that I know better, I'm not saying that I haven't in the past. I've worked for nonprofit organizations and I believe that these programs were vital. But after being in the system for an extended period of time, I understand that this entire system is built on keeping us dependent on a system. So I believe that we got to come out of her. And if churches are going to do charity, then they just need to do charity. It should be a community venture, not something that they partner with the government. And so with this community development, creating these community development corporations, I'm not even really interested in that because that's just like another tax vehicle. I like the refuge and the shelter that a religious organization has. When you start creating separate vehicles for community development corporations, you're basically turning your church into a nonprofit, or you're creating a arm of the nonprofit organization where you start commingling monies and things. Then it just becomes a problem. So my suggestion is don't do that. Don't do that. But anyway, it says through its nonprofit arm, the Abyssinian Development Corporation manages more than 1,200 units of affordable housing in Harlem, in addition to providing other services. By the end of the 20th century, the nonprofit sector was providing even more in social services to the public. And so this is how the churches become pimps, or they become an arm of the government, and they lose their freedom because they have to do what the government says do in order to keep that money coming, because they have made the community dependent upon them. Instead of helping them become self-sufficient, they've made them dependent on government programs. And it's just a vicious cycle. It doesn't help anybody. It may help put a band-aid on a problem for the short term, but the long-term issue is the system just doesn't work. And it's just made to make us reliant upon the beast, the best way to say it. So it says in 1996, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, enacted under President Clinton, included a provision known as charitable choice, which made faith-based organizations eligible to compete for and receive federal money, that's grants, to provide social services without changing their religious identities or practices. Well, this is a trick. And Deacon Tony Williams, I don't know if you follow him, but he did a really good study on how these churches take these 501c3s and then they change. They become a political tool. And so that's not what I'm talking about doing. So it says in 2001, President George W. Bush established the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, which allow faith-based organizations to apply for funding from federal programs. In 2005, more than $2.1 billion in competitive funds, including from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Black Church, including the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Black Church provided services that included childcare, emergency food distribution, clothing distribution, drug and alcohol prevention, and shelter and housing development. Well, those are things that I'm not talking about getting into, because those are things that our people, they just keep the church bound. I guess that's the best way to say it. And they keep our communities dependent on these programs instead of us relying on each other and on the Most High. With this dismantling of the welfare state, the third sector, including faith-based organizations, continue to provide social services to the public. Well, they didn't. The government did not dismantle the welfare state. What the government did was outsource welfare to nonprofit organizations and churches. So the government still does welfare. It's like with foster care and what else have they outsourced? Home visiting and social work. A lot of states got out of doing social work and taking care of foster kids. They created these new laws and rules, and then they allow white people to create these huge entities where they got all this money to do child welfare, social work, and place foster kids and home visiting and all that stuff. And it just made things worse. They don't even talk about it no more. But I mean, you got kids staying in hotels. It's just terrible. But it's the same thing. The money comes from the state. The state gets its money from the federal government. And so when these churches get money for these social services, the government is still doing welfare. It just does it through a third party, and it gets to keep its hands clean. So it says, you will apply for this grant, and then you got this money. So you're responsible for providing the welfare. But we put out a solicitation, and the solicitation basically tells us the welfare that you got to provide in order to get this money. So it's like a contract. You're gonna do our welfare for us. We get to keep our hands clean. We just say you applied, you won, you got this grant, and we're gonna watch you do the welfare that we don't want to do anymore. So it says, as some churches transition their properties from institutional uses to include housing, that can have an impact on the services a community receives. Advocating for land use systems change at the state and local level, Black churches are continuing their work to advance racial equity and community development by changing zoning regulations. I don't know how you advance racial equity, because if a Black church is doing this stuff for Black people, then what difference does it make? It's not equity. It's just a Black church is taking care of a Black community and Black people. So it says, developing by changing zoning regulations, becoming educated on affordable housing construction, and organizing support for faith-based property development to keep residents from being displaced. I like faith-based property development because, one, you're able to, for us, if it's true Israel, we get to live set apart. It's a way for you to live set apart, and it's a way for the churches to enforce their morals and beliefs in a space where, if you want to come there, you're free to come, but you can't live any kind of way. You can't do what you want to do. You can't live any kind of way. We got a code here. If you want to stay here, you got to follow this code. I think it's a wonderful way. I'm totally opposed to everything in this article, except for the property development. And even if it can be developed, to just have it so that people can stay there, as a refuge. And I'll give you an example. Like when people come from across the border and they go stay in these Catholic churches, they like literally live in the Catholic church. They let them sleep on the pews. They feed them. They take baths and use the bathrooms, and they have people there around the clock cleaning up, helping serve and stuff. That is something that our people could do. And then you have the people from the Catholic churches in the community who take turns. They buy food, they drop it off, they make meals, they do all sorts of things. People in the community donate, because they believe that that's a good thing that the church does. Well, our churches don't do that. Our churches, I don't know what our churches do. Now, and I'm not saying all. There are some churches who do really good stuff, but the majority of Black churches sit empty 6 days a week, 5 days a week. Don't do nothing. They don't do nothing for the community. If you don't go to the church, they don't do nothing for you. If you don't come in there, you don't see the church. You don't even know the church exists. Um, there's nothing growing there. Everything there is dead, including the people in the cemetery in the back, on the side, or wherever the cemetery is. So they're like useless. And that's why people don't go to them. They don't have anything to give people. They have no life. And so as things start to decline, I'm not going to read the rest of this article because this video is already long enough. But I just wanted to share with you, maybe that's something, if you're doing surveillance in your own community, maybe it is something that you could talk to maybe a minister. If you know somebody that has a large piece of land and it's just sitting there and nobody's doing nothing with it, maybe convince them to go buy some seeds and plant a garden and put up some fencing to keep the deer out. Start thinking about how they could use that facility to house people who are homeless, because there are going to be a lot of women and children who don't have covering, who are going to need a place to stay, who work, but they can't afford to pay rent, who may have public transportation and don't have a car to stay in. So there are just a lot of things that are getting ready to start happening, and I'm just thinking out loud. So forgive me. But this is something that I think about all the time. You pass by all these churches, they're closed during the week. They don't have nothing going on. They have land and they just are not used. And then people have the audacity to be like, oh, well, they want to come here and they're going to dirty up the church. That's what Jesus wants us to do. That's what the Messiah wants us to do. He wants us to help each other, especially if it's true he's real. We are supposed to look out for one another. And a lot of these churches are not going to be able to do that because they're apostate. They are a part of the ecumenical movement, and so whenever the Pope comes to claim all his stuff, their stuff gonna be gone. So I don't recommend you discussing this with them. But if there are independent churches, independent Black churches, or Gentile churches too, there are independent churches. I know there are a lot around here. The Mennonites here, they own their own land. They build their own churches. They own their own stuff. Amish, same way. That's how we should be. We should have stuff like that, but we don't, because our people don't have vision, and we don't move until we're forced to. And even then, we pine about things that are not even important. But as you see these rent control laws stop being enforced, people's rents are going to go up. As you see people lose their jobs, people are going to become homeless. And you're just going to see a lot of desperate, hopeless people out here. A lot of women and children are going to be living on the street. It's getting ready to get cold. There's going to be less to go around. Food banks are crying about they don't get enough food. And things are only going to get worse. So we have to try to be proactive. And again, if it's nothing but buying tents and letting people pitch a tent and live and set up some rules, get some porta potties, and have things where people can come and clean. Or you gotta figure this thing out before it's too late. They have those mobile trailers where you can have showers and portable bathrooms that you can buy and just have on your property, so that people can use those. Set up plumbing so that those things work if you're going to allow people to stay on your property in tents. But we really need to start thinking about how we are going to be a refuge for our people. And it starts with us planting a seed and maybe talking to some churches or going to some group meetings, or I don't know how you do it. I've been thinking about how I could do it. I have been thinking about this one preacher that I know here, who I can tell he's awakened, because I've gone to the church a couple of times and he said some stuff about who we are. He calls the real name of Yah, and people in church kind of like looking around like, what are you talking about? So I know he's awakened. He's an older gentleman. But I don't know anything about the church, so I would have to ask. But anyway, I'm going to start planting seeds because time is running out and our people need to start figuring out what we're going to do for our people, because nobody else is going to do nothing for us. If we don't do it, those of us who are awakened, we are the field clearers, so to speak. I don't know if you ever had one of those push field clearers. You got a field, you're working the field, you're trying to get it clean so you can do something with it. That's who we are. And so when you are visionary or you're awakened and you're trying to be a light for other people who can't see yet, a lot of times people don't move until they completely see the vision, till they can see it's ready to go into. They don't want to go to the house while it's being built. They don't understand the significance of all the intricate details of making sure, the drywall is on properly and the sheetrock is laid properly and the floor is level. The cabinets are put on right. The door frames are in proper. They don't care about that. They just want to go to the finished product. But oftentimes, you can't even get them to do anything. They want a house, but they don't want to do the work to get the house. They just want to open the door and it's there and it's all pretty and painted and carpet is on the floor. It's move-in ready. Most of our people and most people in general are like that. We have been trained to not see visions. We've been trained to be people who are just ready and primed to just get whatever we need right when we need it, not have to think critically about how to get it. None of that. Somebody else does it. You build it, they'll come. That's how our society is. And so as visionaries, as people who are awakened and enlightened, we have an obligation sometimes to plant those types of seeds. So I'm going to leave this article in the description so that you can share it with other people that you may know who have access to churches or facilities that can be used to um, save people or as a refuge when people get down and out. Now, I will say I do not support going in and getting all this other stuff, getting involved with all this government funding and community development, because I'm not telling nobody to go into this beast infrastructure. I'm not. Whatever you got, that's what you need to have. If you got land and it's paid for outright, that's all you need. Pay the taxes on it. Let us hobo the money to pay that and pray that they still take cash. Or maybe they'll take gold and silver. I don't know. But as far as going into debt or trying to apply for grants and stuff, look, I do that and I'm trying to get out of it. I'm gonna have to get out of it because I'm not planning on working in this system whenever it transitions and I'm forced to do certain things that I cannot talk about because we can't say those words anymore. But same thing applies for these churches. These churches need to try to stay out of this beast system. And if they are in the beast system, I recommend they get rid of all those things associated with the beast system and get out of it. If you got a 501c3, they need to be getting rid of that. They need to donate all those resources to wherever they need to go. If they have fulfilled all their obligations and they can keep their stuff, they need to get out of everything they can get out of and just be a religious ministry, because the hour is coming where you're going to have to make a decision. And even churches who have taken that have merged with government are going to regret it sorely. When we all have to make a choice, many of these churches are going to have to make a choice too. All right, y'all. Please like this video, share, and subscribe to the channel. Please share this particular article with people who are affiliated with religious organizations still, Black churches, Black ministers, whatever, because they need to start thinking with the real kingdom mind. Stop being so heavenly bound. They ain't no earthly good. That's what I like to say. Because our people are going to need a refuge, and the time is coming. It's here. All right, y'all. This is Marley K, and I am out.